it's okay to have PTSD even when it comes to success. It's like PTSD for a military guy is real because it happened. And there was probably violence involved. There was things that they saw that people didn't want to see, and it just does a number to people's human psyche. Well, we often say, well, I didn't have to experience that, so I certainly am not traumatized by anything that took place, and we minimize how we feel about something. But if it was traumatic to you, then it was traumatic, bottom line, and you've got to do some work around it, no matter how deep somebody else thinks it was for you. Like, you are the one that decides how much it hurt and how much what work you need to do around that thing.
You're listening to the Born Primitive Podcast. All right. Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to the Born Primitive Podcast. Got my co-host, Big Tone. Good morning, Tone.
Morning, Bear.
And we got our co-founder with us, a guest appearance. We got Mallory Riley with us this morning as well. Morning, Mal.
Good morning, everyone.
All right. So today's guest, we're really stoked on. There's kind of a personal connection here, but we have a former big leaguer with us here today, 13 seasons in the MLB, won 2 consecutive World Series with 2 different teams, the Royals and the Cubbies. And with the Cubbies in 2016 in that World Series, he was the World Series MVP. So an absolute stud on the diamond. Mal and I grew up huge Cubbies fans, so that was a huge moment. This man had the game-winning hit down the left field line to put the Cubs up in extra innings. A moment I will never forget, and I know Mal won't because Mal was crying. But another cool component beyond what he did on the baseball diamond after getting out of the league. This individual championed a 501c3 called Champion Forward, which we'll get into more of, but focuses on mental health for athletes and sports. Also, father of 3 and a man of strong faith. But without further ado, Ben Zobrist, welcome to the Born Primitive Podcast.
Oh my gosh. Thank you guys so much. Super excited to get to have this conversation. And you guys, I'm looking at you on the screen. You have one of the coolest podcast studios. I don't know if that's virtual or what, but
no, it's real.
I look like I'm at Wrigley Field right now, but I'm really not.
They didn't give you a booth spot up there just to do a quick record up there?
I think they probably would have let me use it if I was there, but the weather might not look as nice as it does in my background right now. So really glad to be here with you guys. Yeah,
and there's a lot we want to get into, Ben, but I want to just get right into something I think Mal and I are excited to talk about. But I want to share with you my Game 7 Cubbies story, because I think it's kind of funny and unique. But for those that weren't Cubbies fans, 2016, Cubbies won the World Series. We hadn't won since it was 1908. It was a tough run for Cubbies fans. So for a lot of us, that was an incredible moment. Went to Game 7 in Cleveland. You're at the opponent's place. You're curious how it's going to go. Cubbies were up 6-3, bottom 8. And then that 2-run bomb down the line tied it at 6, and then Cubbies ended up winning in extra innings. Ben got the game-winning double down the left field line in extras, totally crazy. And then the Cubs closed it out in bottom 10. So absolute wild Game 7. It was absolute insanity. But for me, Ben, I was in training, military training down in Fort Chaffee, Arkansas, and we had a training mission that night. So when I heard it was going to Game 7, I was like, damn, are you kidding me? I'm going to miss Game 7 Cubs World Series. And so we had F-18s that were part of our training mission that night. And in the mission brief, I was, talking with these guys, just small talk, and I realized one of the F-18 pilots was a big Cubbies fan. And I was like, hey, man, I don't know how your all's jets work, but do you get AM radio up there? Is that what are you working with? It's a $200 million asset. I'm thinking they can get, they can get the Cubbies AM radio somehow, right? And he's like, oh yeah, I got you. And I said, all right, so, I had 2 radios and you have 8 or 10 channels, right? And I told him, all right, at the top and bottom of every hour, I'm going to switch to the alternate channel that those guys use, and I need a scoring update. And the guy was like, got you. So at the top and bottom every hour, I would switch to Fire's 2 channel, and he would give me the scoring update, and I'd go right back to the main channel and keep doing my thing. And it had gotten to the point, I was getting great updates, like, lead off home run, he told me about, and this, and I'm getting the play-by-play, the Rossi home run, all these things, right? And as we did our like final part of this mission, the Cubbies you guys were up 6-3, and I'm like, all right, this is, I think it was in top 6-3. I'm like, we're looking solid. And we got back in the Humvees, and the turret gunner must have got another update, and he looked down at me, said, hey, 6-6, bottom 8. And I was like, my stomach just dropped, and I was like, it's happening again. As Cubbies fans, you know what I'm talking about. Like, you got to be kidding me. Like the Bartman curse, it's happening. Like, we're seeing it in real time, and I'm back in the back of a Humvee, not able to see it. And then obviously it went to extras, and by that time we had all gotten back. We were all in the parking lot, and we had the radio on, and all the Humvees circled up, and every guy, we had like 60 dudes had the game on, and we were all listening. And then you hit that double down the line, and everyone went nuts. And it was late at night, and it was cold, and it was just a really cool experience. So I didn't actually get to watch it, but I was getting updates from a $200 million government asset off the books, of course. And that's how I experienced my World Series. And then, of course, I called Mal, and you were just crying, and just there. You watched it at home.
Yeah, the World Series game was obviously epic, but the entire series, it was all the games were like extra, not all of them, but extra innings, late games, staying up late. And just an awesome experience. And I definitely probably cried for like 20 minutes out of sheer happiness, of course.
We just
my gosh.
And we just pulled up highlights on the computer right before we started, and Mal got emotional even watching the YouTube highlights of Game 7. So I guess I wanted to start with that, but there's a whole lot to cover. But walk me through that Game 7, and particularly you got up top 10. I think it was runner on. Was there a guy on second? I know you hit a double down the line. It was you hit a guy in second, right?
Yeah, there was men on first and second. Okay. And what happened in that inning was, we had a leadoff single by a guy that was like had a half a leg, Kyle Schwarber. He was coming back from an ACL. Hadn't had an at bat basically for a long period of time, and comes in that game and comes through with a huge hit in the extra innings. And then Albert Almora has a big base running play. He pinch runs for him, and there's a long fly ball by Chris Bryant to center field. Albert tags from first base, gets to second base. So that sets it up. 1 out, man on second. Anthony Rizzo, our best players, coming to the plate. I'm at that point going to the on deck circle, and I knew what they were going to do, because Rizzo's our best hitter. It's like, you don't pitch to the best hitter on the team, when you can set up a double play and there's 1 out in the extra innings, regardless of who's on deck. But still, I would always choose to pitch to a Ben Zobrist over an Anthony Rizzo, because, he's just an incredible player, And so I come up there and I know what's at stake. And there's been, I think one of the things as an athlete that you think about in a situation like that is okay, I knew it was a huge, huge moment. I knew that it was probably the biggest moment of my career, but at the same time, I knew like I had no chance against the guy throwing a 98-mile-an-hour cutter that's funky. I had no chance when I'm already 0 for 3 or 4 off of him in my career. I hadn't done anything, hit a ball solid, even though I know what pitch is coming. It's hard. Like, when you don't know what pitch is coming, it's hard enough. But if you know what pitch is coming and you still can't hit it, it's like super frustrating, right? And that's what his cutter was like. Brian Shaw was the guy's name. And so I literally was going up there like, the only thing I'm focusing on right now is doing the best that I can to give myself the best chance to just put a ball solid in play on the other side of the field. I just wanted to be on the opposite side of the field because his cutter is so hard and it comes in so hard. And so that's what I focused on. I got enough of a pitch. And this was with 2 strikes. I'm like surviving up there, right? And I just get the barrel to the ball. And when I hit it off the bat, I knew I kind of hit it solid, but it was a ground ball. And I'm like, that's a double play if it's not through the infield. And what somebody told me is the pitch before that, the third baseman had decided to take 2 steps to his left, and I had to hit the ball to his right.
Yeah.
And so the pitch before that, if I had done that, he'd have backhanded it, double play, out of the inning, right? And what happened is he moves over, and I slapped the ball down the line, he dives and it just goes outside of his reach at third base, right? And when I hit it, I knew I hit it solid, but when I saw it go past him at third base, I still get chills talking about it because I was like, what is happening right now? What is my life that I am like hitting an extra inning hit in Game 7 of the World Series, and I didn't remember anything until I got to second base, and I'm doing the fist pump like it was surreal. And then I look over at Rizzo, and he's doing the whole like, oh my God, thing, and it was just a surreal moment, and I feel chills. But I also had chills when you were telling me your story, right? About like, I'm like envisioning all these people that are in the stands that are going nuts, watching it in person and going crazy. And then there's a cut to some guy that's sitting at his father's grave, listening to the game on the radio. And then there's a cut to you guys finishing, the night's like mission thing that you're working on in your uniforms and all your gear, and you're sitting around just listening. And then you guys go crazy. It's like, I get the joy of getting to hear how all these moments impacted different people in different ways. In it's just a really magical feeling to know that you were a part of that.
Oh, so cool, man. And so was it the cutter? That's what he gave you?
Yeah. Oh yeah. That's what he throws, especially to lefties. It was just a 98 mile an hour nasty cutter. And it's really funky delivery. It was hard to pick up.
Jeez.
I would argue there's no better feeling. And Ben, I think you played a lot of sports growing up too, and as did me and my brothers, but we always talk about there is no better feeling than, of course, it would have been nicer if it was a home run, but regardless, that moment, you can't even put into context how big of a moment that is. That feeling when you realize, and in your case, it was when you realized it got past the infielder, but just that moment of contact in baseball is such a pure moment because there's so much focus going into that. And especially as you get to higher levels and you're facing 96, 98, like that moment when you're able to make solid contact, because it's like, like I said, there's so much focus required to do that it's a magical moment. And I would say the home run is like the pinnacle of that. When you hit a home run in that moment off the bat, when you realize the contact you just made, it's hard to even put that moment into words, even comparing it to other big moments in sports, whether that's scoring a touchdown or a big shot in basketball. It's a very magical moment.
Yeah, I guess it's got to be akin somewhat to like, like a really good golfer when they like strike the ball really well and they know it, like they don't even have to look at where the ball went, like they hit it perfectly off the club or something like that. It's just it's that feeling of doing something physically, but you did it before you don't even have to see the result.
Yep.
Like you have that muscle memory where it just, boom, it happened, it happened immediately for you. And I obviously you played, so like there's sometimes you hit it great and it doesn't matter. Like you did your job, but like somebody's right there to catch it, and or it's a line drive, it's not quite a home run or something like that where it doesn't really do the job. But I think that's where there's a part of this whole equation where you realize so much of it is out of your control. Like you do what you can do, and that's the best you can do in the scenario. But at the end of the day, if the people, if the other side of it, if it wasn't meant to be, it's not going to happen. So there was a part of me that was also going like, I am inside of this thing happening to me. And I was like, I can't believe like I'm involved in this. I mean, I know I worked really hard, but you can't force yourself to get into a situation like that and to come through. Like, it's just, those moments are serendipitous in a way because you can't make them happen. They just happen in the moment.
And walk us through like the mental state you were in, particularly like, you're on deck and they're going to walk Rizzo, right? And so you immediately know, like, I'm the guy. It's going to, obviously I think there was 1 out. So it's not like if you struck out or something, it's not the end of the inning. But as you got up to the plate, what was your mental approach? And something cool, we've interviewed a couple of UFC fighters, and a cool thing that we've extracted from that, and I think it's really cool how honest they are, is that you kind of learn that there is some fear in sports, particularly combat sports, but like, and it's okay to have fear. And a lot of people think, oh, like these badass fighters, like they're never afraid, and they get in the ring and they're being all cocky when they're actually terrified because they're about to fight another man in a cage. So when you got up to the plate, was there, any doubt, self-doubt? You know, how did you battle that? I'm sure, and you know, we all kind of have that, particularly in baseball. It's such a precise sport. You know what I mean? If you're 1 out of 3, you're Hall of Famer. So I guess when you got into the box, what were the thoughts racing through your mind? How did you deal with that and just focus in on your training to execute what you had to do?
Yeah, that's a great question. One of the things we talk about, you know, in the organization that I'm working with right now is how all emotions are neutral. They're not good or bad. And, you know, fear can be an intense emotion that kind of, you know, takes you into fight or flight and all these things that are not healthy for you necessarily in the moment. But, you know, to be able to execute something like that, I think, you know, what I talk about to the guys that I've started coaching on the mental skills side of things is, first of all, you got to know yourself, right? You got to know what's actually going on. And I think one of the most dangerous things about fear is when you actually avoid it and you pretend like it's not there. Because I think you have to face up and know that you're entering into a situation where there's a lot of risk. And you got to accept that going in and know that I don't care. I want this. Regardless, I'm going to step into this and I'm going for it despite the risk and the fear that's involved. And you got to know yourself and know what you're feeling in regard to that. But then, you know this, you got to know your opponent. If you don't know the opponent that you're facing, and part of the opponent for me was, before I ever stepped in the box, it was the opponent of myself, the ego side of me that's like, yeah, I want to come through for the team. I want to be the guy that does the job. And where your ego can take you in that moment is to try to do too much, to try to be the hero, to try to like hit the home run and like, I'm going to crush this. And it's like, I couldn't think about any of that. So that was my first battle, is overcoming that like side of me. And I was going, no, Ben, like, you can't think that way. That's not going to work for you. Especially not against this guy. You got to know your opponent. He's tough on you. You haven't done anything against him in the past. And you have got to come up with a different strategy that's going to help you give yourself the best chance. And it still may not work out, you know? So I'm like walking in there, like kind of open-handed, like I don't have the best idea. I don't know exactly what I need to be doing, but here's my plan. So like I'm taking myself out of the ego, and I'm fighting the fear of like failing and just focusing on what do I need to focus on, right? So know myself, know my opponent, got to be able to make the adjustment. And that was a mental adjustment before I ever got up to the plate. It's like, I know I'm going to take the first pitch. I know I'm going to stay on the other side of the field. You know, I know despite what could happen, I'm going to just be dedicated to making this happen from my control side. Right. And then at the end of the day, you got to be able to do it all quickly. You got to be able to process all that stuff really quickly to where, you know, I hear the fans. I know what's going on. But as soon as I step in the box, all of it goes away. You know, there is nothing else but just my strategy against this opponent, knowing what I'm capable of. That's all that matters in that moment. And I wasn't thinking about anything about the curse or any of that. It's just, there's that baseball and what that baseball is going to do, you know?
And I think fear a little bit, for at least my mind, or how I attack things, and I'm sure you guys are quite the same because we all have very similar personalities in this room, is it almost makes you a little bit more determined. You know, you go up, I had a similar, obviously nowhere close to World Series, but my high school softball team was never one that was that great, but we made it to regionals my senior year, and I was 0 for 2 strikeouts. This team was like our mortal enemies, and went to the plate late in the game and ended up hitting a triple off the wall. And you know, it wasn't. I think it was the game. It was not like the end of the game, like it was the bottom of the 9. You had to score, but it was the game-winning hit. And of course, you're terrified walking up to the plate. Of course, you're doubting everything. I've already got 2 strikeouts. There's no way that I'm gonna, you know, hit the ball. But from how I think of things, it almost like pisses me off. Or like, I'm afraid, but I know I can do X, Y, and Z to make this happen. And I'm going to use that fear and like tell myself, like, I'm afraid, but don't let yourself give up. Like, you know, for me, it almost like gives you a little bit more push and determination to get that hit and to get extra angry when you grab that bat and whack the crap out of it. So yeah, I mean, everything you're saying is, you know, spot on as well. I mean, and I haven't really thought about softball for a really long time. I played when I was 4 up until 22. but this is bringing back a lot of memories of just the challenges you face out on the field and at the plate. And I pitched as well, so on the mound.
Yeah, and
with young kids, we have to talk to them a lot about courage, right? Because what anger does give you some of is courage. Like, oh, instead of the fear like making me just shy away and like I'm going to step back because I'm too scared to step forward. One of the things that fear calls you to is I got to have enough courage to step into that fear, right? And so you're like, I ain't stepping out. I'm not quitting because I'm feeling this. Like, and in order for me to get through it, I gotta crash into that fear a little bit, and I think that's one of the things that a lot of young athletes have to, if they're going to overcome some of their fears, there is a level of anger and we talk about anger. The healthy anger is passion. There's enough passion in you to say, I don't care how scared I am. I'm going to push and go for this anyways. And if I fail, so be it. I think that's a really important piece of a young athlete's development.
Well, it's like training. You realize fear is a bit of a facade in the sense that like there is a use in fear, and especially from a biological standpoint, as humans, we have fear for a reason. But as you said, if you try to shy away from the fear, you're actually making it almost unconscious at that point, and it will continue to grow. Whereas what you're saying is like, hey, bring it into your consciousness, like be very aware of it, because at least in my experience, you start to see that it melts away. And especially over time, as you get better at it, you realize like, oh, this is a biological response happening right now. But the more aware I am of it, you realize like, oh, it's more of a mind state, and it actually folds away when you have the courage to kind of step into it. So it's weird because it kind of goes against our biological like naturalness to like, hey, use this fear as a response to get the hell out of here. But as you get better, and as like a muscle in the gym, as you train it over and over, I think you get better and better, as you just said, stepping into it as opposed to turning your back to it and think it's going to run away.
I'm curious about, I agree with that. I'm curious about your guys' view of that, the adrenaline that comes with fear, because I read a book that really changed my mind about that. It's called Overachievement by Dr. John Elliott. It was one of the most mental skills books that really challenged me. And I think it's great for young athletes, because one of the things it taught to me was how to look at what my body was doing in that moment, like the nervousness, the shakiness, the feeling in the pit of my stomach, like basically that's your body preparing to do its best. It's adrenaline welling up in you. Yes, you care. Yes, it matters. You don't want to fail, all those things, but it's actually giving you more energy to take what you've trained yourself to do and actually like do better than you could do if you had no adrenaline, And so adrenaline, like we think of it like, oh no, this is anxiety. It's cortisol. It's all these things that the stress hormones that like, yeah, it's stressful, but it's also your body welling up to like have more strength than you had in a normal moment, or more ability to perform. So if you can harness that adrenaline and focus it into the one or two things that you need to be focusing on in that moment, would you agree with that, Bear? I mean, I know you guys as military guys have those same feelings when you're about to go on a mission and you have duties and you got things you got to make happen.
Yeah, I think there's an optimal, I think, middle ground, right? That I think that optimizes human performance. I think, like we talked about, if you discard it, you're not using it because it can enhance your performance. But I think there's times where people get crippled by fear and then they just can't perform in any capacity. So I think it's finding that middle ground. And I think the biggest thing that can mitigate getting to the wrong end of that spectrum where you're, kind of incapacitated and can't perform is whatever craft it is you're trying to hone in on, is making as many components of that become part of your subconscious action, right? So with hitting, it's like you've taken a million soft tosses, batting practice. That swing for you was part of your subconscious. So when he threw you that cutter, you weren't thinking about it, you just acted. For a lot of stuff I was doing in the military, by making more of the things you learn part of your subconscious, it frees up your bandwidth to assess the situation and actually use your brain to assess something that you haven't trained or is a more dynamic situation. So I think as you get more comfortable in whatever it is you're trying to be elite in, as the more of those things get stashed away into the subconscious, the more you can really perform at a high level. And I think you're spot on. I think that fear does absolutely enhance performance if it can be balanced, kind of right in the middle of that spectrum. But if it gets too far, you see people just crumble. And that's why I think you see people choke in sports, where it's like, you know what I mean? They get that reputation of like, all right, when the game's on the line or this and that, this person always, I think that those people, I think, have had a difficulty dealing with that emotion. But that's just my take on it.
I think that's amazing. I mean, I love what you said there about like how it frees up. Like you have to train. It's that muscle memory. It's all the things that they talk about early on in sports. Like if you don't train all the other components that need to be in place, you can't, when it becomes dynamic, you can't make adjustments or quickly change in the moment because your brain doesn't have the ability to do all those things in split second, right? It's going to need more time. And if you have to act in a split second manner to be clutch and to make the right move and use your adrenaline for your benefit as opposed to a detriment, it will cause you to slow up your reactions, right? You won't be able to make the adjustment as quickly as you need to, and that's what, people talk about clutch performance. And we as an organization with Champion Forward have come up with our own formula for that, and it involves the ability to be aware and be balanced and to be connected in a healthy way. But then there's always that versatility. If you don't have enough of the training of those other areas to get to the moment of where you need to be versatile and adjust, then you won't be ready. You have to train the other things that are fundamentals of mental stability. Kind of like as an athlete, if I'm not fundamentally strong enough to stay balanced in my stance, we're talking about hitting, or in my stance as a fielder or whatever, if I haven't done all the training of my lower body and my movements to be stable, then I can't do the right things with my hands and the barrel of the bat. All that stuff is up above the chain, right? All the things at the bottom of the chain have to be working together to get me ready to make those slight adjustments with my hands and the barrel of the bat in order to go into the ball that's changing all the time for me, right? So it's really a clear picture of there is a level of growing that you have to do, and 10,000 hours, or the amount of like deep practice that has to be happening in your body and mind in order to get to a place where you can make a dynamic change in a split second when it's really called upon.
Yeah, the more you step into that, your capacity expands, and then it's exactly like you don't get overwhelmed by the moment because you've built that capacity to handle stress. And if you haven't stepped into that, as you two both said, it's like you will fold when those external stressors, especially in an exponential moment like the World Series. If you haven't put in that time, it's gonna bury you into the ground if you haven't built that capacity and bandwidth to handle a moment like that, which has, although on the surface seems like, oh, there's 4 or 5 variables, your stance, the pitcher. It's like, if you would really sit and list them out, there's thousands of things happening all in one moment.
Yeah. Since all three of you guys were involved in younger athletics, right?
Yes.
Like Bear, before you were in military. So like, how do you think, how capable do you think people under the age of 18 are, when we know now that the brain isn't fully developed really? I mean, for girls, they're a little bit more capable because their brains get developed faster than the boys. But what we do know is the brain doesn't fully have capacity for a male until they're like 25 years old, right? If that's the case, how capable are they of building some of that stuff early on?
Yeah, that's a tricky one, and it sounds like that may be part of the mission of your organization, Ben. Is it? I've never heard of someone actually approaching and going right at that problem. So curious. I don't know the answer to that. I mean,
well, I think there's the value of good mentorship or coaches, is because it should be, in my experience, it should be somebody that has traveled those paths before. That, say you're 16 and this was me. You're at a high level travel tournament. And they start to recognize, oh, there's something going on right now in the way they're approaching the game mentally that is either maybe they're too hard on themselves or they're too in their head. And somebody that has traveled that path can pull you aside and say, hey, like I see where you're at, and they can see you for where you're at, but then they could also see like a future version of you that would be able to handle the situation different. And of course, they shouldn't be delusional in thinking, oh, I can get you there right now, but they should be able to help you close that gap from a development standpoint. And that's what it sounds like that's what your organization does, of like, hey, here's some tools that I used as I got to the higher levels to be able to handle a situation that you're at. And that to me is that's the magic of a really good coach, in my experience, is the ones that can help you close that gap on your current version of yourself versus a future version of yourself that is able to handle things in a more dynamic, responsive way.
Yeah, and I think the challenge too is the different sports. I think the mental challenges were so different. So, for me, Ben, I was baseball, but football, and I ended up playing football in college. And I was always the kind of like, if I, missed a play in football, I would get mad, and that would enhance my performance. Because then if it's like, all right, I was a linebacker, so if I'm taking on the fullback the next play and I'm pissed, like I'm going to blow this guy up, right? And that would help, right? In baseball, you get rung up on the outside corner and you didn't like the call on a full count with a guy in scoring position, and you carry that back into the field at first base, and then at your next at bat, you can't get mad because then you're going to pull your head, you're going to strike out again because you're mad and you want to smash the ball. So I think the different sports present different challenges mentally, and I thought baseball was mentally much more challenging for me because I couldn't just get mad, right? I had as you guys know, it has to be short-term memory, and you can't go back out to the field thinking about that backwards K that you just, that you thought was 3 inches out off the corner. You know what I mean? Whereas football, it's like, all right, very next play, line it up and let's freaking go. You know what I mean? And you can't get that mad. I mean, if it's play action, you bite up on the run and they, drop one behind you. That's a case where being mad won't help in football. But for the most part, you can get away with a little bit of, getting a little bit fired up. So I think part of it is sport specific, and baseball, golf, some of these I would argue more precise sports. Man, the mind has to be really dialed in because there's a lot of dangers, and particularly with baseball, it's like, you could be 0 for 3 going into your 4th at bat, and maybe you get the game-winning hit and you end up 1 for 4 with 3 RBIs. That's a really good day at the office, right? But up to that, maybe you had 3 Ks and that was a horrible day, right? So it's like it's such a, it was so, I don't know, it was such a mind game. Or maybe you start out 1 for 1 and you think you're gonna have a great day, and then you get 3 Ks and that last K was to end the game. And now you're going back to the bus like, I just blew it. I had a horrible day, right? So for me, that was the hardest part with baseball, was dealing with that. And of course, you guys were at a much more higher level than me, but baseball was my whole life. So I got to up to 18 and got to, ride those roller coasters. So I think part of it is sports specific. And I don't know if there's a one size fits all approach for all youth sports. It might need to be catered a little bit depending on what they're doing, but I think the general principles probably still do apply across all of them.
Yeah, I agree with that. The more technical the movements, the less emotion usually helps to do the movement. Because if you just need force, you do need to get emotional to a certain degree, because the emotions are going to help you. The anger is going to help you create more force. But when it's technical and the force needs to be applied in a very, very technical way, through a bat or some sort of motion with your hands, that's dexterity, and you've got to have very, very fine-tuned dexterity to be able to make slight adjustments like that. Emotions don't usually help. So it really, talking about emotions from a coach's standpoint, from a caretaker standpoint, or from a competitor standpoint. Okay, let's talk about those 3, because those are the 3 that Champion Forward works with. Like the competitors, especially if they're youth competitors, there's some keys and tips we can give them to start building the mental skills to be a great performer. But what we're focused on is how do we help you thrive in the midst of all the performance pressure? Because sports naturally are putting you on a stage, whether there's just your parents watching or whether it's a stadium of 50,000 people or millions of people watching the World Series, there's a level of performance pressure. When you step to the plate and that you're up against that guy, if you strike out, you feel a level of embarrassment because you were in front of everybody and you just struck out. That guy got the best of you in that moment, right? And you have to learn as an athlete, especially a baseball player in that sport, to be able to take, you got knocked down, but you're going to get back up and take the same level of confidence the next time as you had the first time. Even though, going into that final at bat with the Cubs, does anybody know what I did before that? You guys have any idea what my stats were?
No.
I was 0 for 4.
Oh, see?
I was 0 for 4.
Yeah.
in the game going into that at bat. That probably helped me not try to be the hero. Sometimes when you stink in the game, it helps you have a healthy level of like what your limits are and say, hey, just stay within yourself and do what you're capable of doing. Right. So, but emotionally as a young athlete, it's hard for them to make sense of all that. They're feeling things. They're trying to perform. When they strike out, they feel terrible, especially if they strike out at the end of the game. They're like, I blew it for my team. There's a lot there. We can help some of those athletes, but if the parents and the coaches that they're around don't do their own work as adults, they can make the situation worse for the young athlete. So our organization really focuses on a lot of the caretakers. Like, are you emotionally intelligent and are you skilled around what you're feeling and what you're going to say in the car ride home? Because they're going to need something when things don't go well from you. And one of the things they don't need is more criticism, because if they're really highly sensitive to failing already because they know what they did wrong, then they're just going to hear criticism and beat themselves up more. Whereas, they might need something different. Every kid is different in what they need, but the parents and the coaches have got to be emotionally intelligent in order to, like you said, Tony, bridge that gap of where they're at right now and where they want to be. So it's a teaching moment. It's like, okay, how did it go? What did you feel about that? Yep. You're not happy about that. Okay, great. What do you want to do about it? What do you think you need to do about it? A lot of it is more entering into the situation with curiosity instead of criticism. If we as parents and coaches and adults that should be more emotionally intelligent and more developed, mentally skilled, we should be the ones asking the curious questions that help them develop and bridge the gap from where they are to where they want to be. That's kind of our mission as an organization is, how do we help you thrive in the midst of performance pressure? Not just if you're 12 or 13 to 18-year-old kid. How about the parents? You're feeling pressure for your kid and you want him to get that scholarship and you don't want him to feel terrible for blowing the game. But how are you handling that moment? Are you thriving in the midst of your own kids' performance pressure? Or are you making it harder for them to develop because you're just feeling the same things and you're not emotionally developed enough to deal with that? So that's some of the stuff that we're working with, competitors and caretakers and coaches on.
And it's such a good call out because it's sad. And I helped coach some softball teams and I did private lessons for a while after college. And it really is sad to see how few parents, in my eyes at least, in my experience, have that true emotional regulation to where you see them fail. And then, like I said, a true mentor, it's not criticism. You're not down their back as to why they failed. Of course, there may be a moment for that if when they're older or if it's necessary every once in a while. But I'm sure, Ben, you run into it all the time. You see so many parents, the only tool they have in their toolkit is criticism and anger. And it's like, hey, like you're setting up a voice inside of that kid's head who is a sponge right now at 9 years old for him to only double down. And I went through this myself. And I think, Ben, I would love to ask then how you landed on these truths and or just how you landed on this emotional intelligence, and if it was something you integrated while you were playing or if it was after and you reflected. But what I was getting with the prior point is that you're setting up a system in which the only voice they know is criticism, both internally and then externally, and there's a shelf life to that. That may be good for the short term because there is a fueling to that, to your spirit. Like it will result in action, but it's exhausting over time. And I felt that as I got to college, and all of a sudden you're in the Big 12, you're having to perform against Texas University. I hadn't learned that emotional regulation. So as I started to fail, as I was a big fish in a small pond in high school, hitting 500, all of a sudden you're in college. It's like, you don't know how to regulate that failure. And of course you do your best, but the only tool you knew was like self-criticism. And that's like a snake eating its own tail. Like there's a shelf life on that. And you're going to run yourself dry to a moment where you have a reflection of like, this isn't working anymore.
You made some really great points there. I hope people were really paying attention to that, because what it does end in is it ends in burnout.
Yeah.
And I did experience that. So like, here's the thing. Here's one of the truths that how I came to some of the understanding of this. I have both failed in those moments and I've succeeded in those moments. Let me tell you something. Succeeding doesn't take the pressure away. It doesn't equal thriving. That's the tricky thing that people don't realize, because what you'll hear from people is like, hey, go after it and go get it, and it's going to be amazing. It actually doesn't help relieve the pressure at all. What relieves the pressure is the ability to be skilled enough to go, hey, this is my life on the field. This is what I'm capable of, and I'm going to go after it, and I'm going to try to be a hero for my teammates and my team and my city and everything else that I'm involved in. And I'm going to be pretty hard on myself because I want to be really great at that. But also, when I step away from this, I got to know who I am as a human being when I didn't perform or I did perform out there as a hero. Because as a human being, we thrive in connection. We thrive in having a sense of balance in life. But to sometimes to perform at that level, you have to be out of balance. You have to be so locked into that and only that you give up your whole life in order to get that championship, you know? And what I would say, what I want to tell people is that I dealt with, right after the World Series, a level of depression I had never experienced before. And I was beating myself up more because I wasn't happy after doing all that. And then I'm like, you should be more happy than you are. You should be able to say yes to all these things that people are asking you to do now. And I just was criticizing myself more. So like you said, criticism might help you perform sometimes in the moment, but it has a shelf life, and you will end in burnout if you don't learn to manage some of this. So after that point, I was a different player. Like I actually learned to enjoy the game more. I learned to decompress and say no, say no to things that were going to take too much of me, and say yes to the things that I really wanted, and the things that were really giving me life outside of the game. And, I can say easily now that I'm a much happier, more joyful person than I was in that moment. Even though I performed really well, like, it didn't make me happy, and I needed to learn some of these skills of of really growing as a human being, even as I'm trying to become a hero on the field for my team.
Well, and the huge part there, Ben, and I feel like you'd be able to speak on this, it's almost it's the difference between operating from your ego versus operating from your human essence. And that it doesn't mean you get rid of your ego. The ego is an important part of us being individualized as a human. But what happens is, if you're operating from your human, you're less attached to the end result and more attached to just who you're becoming throughout the result. Whereas the ego identifies with the end result. And if that end result doesn't play out exactly how you had hoped or your expectations, that whole house of cards comes crumbling down on top of each other. And that's where that, at least in my experience, that depression can come from, is you didn't get the result that your ego had identified its whole structure with. So when one of those cards gets pulled out, all of a sudden you don't know who you are anymore. Whereas if you're operating from the human essence or spirit, it's like, that's unshakable. That's grounded in truth. And regardless of the outcome, you know who you are on a deep human level, as opposed to this facade you've created about expectations and what dad and mom wanted and what coach wanted.
And I think also
100%.
I was gonna say, to parallel that as well off of just general life, is I find you explain the scenario of you on the field and then you off the field. And I find that a lot here at Born Primitive. I mean, Bear and I created Born Primitive 10 years ago. It's pretty much my identity. But now I have a little girl who's a year and a half, and I find myself getting better at leaving work at work and being able to focus on her and her needs when I get home. And sometimes I still fail. Sometimes I still am working at 7:30 when she's wanting my attention, and I have to tell myself this can wait. But it does take some skill and some working at it to be able to almost have those two different mindsets in work, or it was work for you as well, but sports, and then your home life and who you are outside of that.
100%. Yeah. Transitioning different roles is one of the trickiest things to do as adults that we all have to find a way to do.
Ben, you had said something earlier that I thought was gold as part of this. You said succeeding doesn't mean thriving. And I think that needs to go up on a billboard or something, because that is a theme we've honed in on here on this podcast a few times. And in another point we've talked about, we did an episode called Chasing Success and False Summits. And basically we talked about how, for some people, for particularly type A people that want to chase success, you identify what you think is these peaks that you're going to go. And as soon as you get to the peak, you've officially made it. So maybe you want to become a Division I, athlete. So you do that, and then you get there. Okay, well, and you just keep going to these peaks, and every time you get to a peak, you realize it's a false summit, and there's another peak right above it. And then you realize the peak didn't actually bring you the happiness that you thought, and you didn't take the time to really appreciate your achievement. Instead, you get to the peak and you see the next one, and you just throw your rucksack back on and you keep climbing rather than enjoying the moment and looking back down over the valley you just climbed up and maybe drink a beer or whatever. And that's an analogy we talked about. So it seems to me that you experienced an extreme false summit as the World Series MVP for a team that had not won a World Series in 100 plus years, with one of the biggest fan bases in baseball. Extra inning, Game 7. You literally couldn't have wrote a more epic script for you to it's crazy. I'm getting goosebumps thinking about it. But even in that moment, somebody like you that we all would have held up on a pedestal and think that guy has the world, wrapped around his finger, that you experienced the same thing, that you hadn't made it. You didn't get that. So I think it's such a wild thing when you really think through it. And I think it's something we all have to be conscious of and enjoy those small victories. And Mal and I, we're horrible at that here with Born Primitive. I mean, there's been some major business milestones that have come and gone. And I would one of us would text it to the other person. We go, oh, that's kind of cool. And then we immediately go into talking about some problem we're trying to solve. And it's like, wait a second, that should have warranted a champagne bottle and you know what I mean? Some cool, you know what I mean? And we didn't, and it's right in the problem. And so I don't know, walk me through, or I guess, can you, expand on that a little bit, particularly your Game 7? I mean, why do you think that happened? Where was the void?
Just riding. So, okay. I was riding the wave of the achievement, the desire to reach that summit. Okay. So it's like when you're so focused on nothing but the summit, right? And you're just climbing that mountain, you're climbing hard, and you're trying to lead the way, and you've been tasked by your organization. They're paying you a lot of money to try to achieve that summit. And that's all that matters sometimes, is what it feels like in the moment. Your whole day is surrounded around that particular thing happening. Like I was spending time with my family. I always made time priorities with my other roles. The question was, were those other roles as tied to achievement, to the thing I needed to achieve at work, as I needed when I was at work? It's like, if I can't put that down and be okay with it not happening, that's, I think, where it starts to become something like my faith journey is Christian, and it starts to become something like an idol of something I'm worshiping almost, that I've got to go get this thing, and you don't even realize it's captured your heart so deeply until you have it and you're like, what am I don't even know what to do with this, right? And so what I didn't realize is I'm pursuing this thing because I've been tasked to do it, and I think that this is the thing that I'm called to do at this time in my life. And I was, but if I wasn't able to stop it, like you said, have some gratitude for the achievement, but put it away, relax, get into my other roles, just be okay not being okay, essentially. What I needed after all that is I needed about a week or two of nothingness, not hearing from anybody. But what I did was I went to Jimmy Fallon's show. Went to the Conan O'Brien show. I went to Disney World on a private jet. All these people I had 5,000 requests within 2 days. And so instead of shutting it all off and being okay, shutting the world off and going, this is what I need for me to be able to be have gratitude and enjoy just being a simple human being. I was like, I got to be a hero now again for all these people that need me to do these things for them. And that's what people don't realize. I always pray for the guys that get the MVP now in the World Series, because I'm like, man, he has no idea what he's about to be. His agent's going to get all this stuff. And it's crazy. When you have that level of opportunity at your fingertips, if you don't know yourself enough to know what to say yes and no to, it will be a tidal wave of things coming at you that you're not used to, and I was codependent at the time with saying yes to people, and I didn't want to let anybody down. And I had to learn to set some healthy boundaries, and that was part of my learning to be able to stop and have some gratitude. Was I had to say no to some of these great things so that I could say yes to the best things, the most important things.
And how long, Ben? So you win World Series MVP. You, for 2 weeks, sounds like you were probably flying all over the place, having appearance after appearance. And then I think you mentioned earlier that you had a kind of a depression you fell into around that same time. Walk us through what that timeline went and kind of some of the skills or lack of skills that you found yourself having during that time. And then how did you eventually, and how much time did it take for you to kind of work your way out of that and maybe start to perceive kind of your reality and build the skill set to start to navigate life again?
Yeah, it's really it was really, when I look back, it was the catalyst to a lot of the mental health journey I've had in the last 5-6 years. And I guess it's 6, almost 7 now since that point. But the catalyst was really about that moment. It's what led me into actually doing therapy, like on a regular weekly basis for the first time, one-on-one with a therapist, where I started to learn, like, my struggle was not, it's okay to have PTSD even when it comes to success. It's like PTSD for a military guy is real because it happened, and there was probably violence involved. There was things that they saw that people didn't want to see, and it just does a number to people's human psyche. Well, we often say, well, I didn't have to experience that, so I certainly am not traumatized by anything that took place. And we minimize how we feel about something. But if it was traumatic to you, then it was traumatic, bottom line. And you've got to do some work around it, no matter how deep somebody else thinks it was for you. Like, you are the one that decides how much it hurt and how much what work you need to do around that thing, right? And so this led me into my mental health journey of doing that. But it also took about 2-3 months for me to like level out and kind of just like let the dust settle. And then by the time spring training came around, like, I didn't get great workouts in that winter, but by the time spring training came around, like, I was still feeling depressed. But I was able to have enough downtime and less pressure to be able to go, like, kind of catch a little bit of a breath and go, okay, like, what is my life about? But it took me 2-3 months just to even ask that question. Cause I was like, like, I couldn't sleep. I was having trouble with sleep. I was having trouble, like I just felt like I was going in a spiral down. I had suicidal ideation. A lot of people think they're like, oh no, what's, I just, like, I thought, what's happening to me? Something's really wrong. But if you have a job that says you have to go tell the team if you want to take any medication for anything you do, also you're getting drug tested on a weekly to biweekly basis. And so, like, it's a very private struggle a lot of times. And if you don't have a safe place to share that, which often people don't, especially in high achieving areas, like, there's not usually safe places to talk about your struggles because you're afraid that my struggle with this is going to cost me opportunities, cost me the ability to achieve like I've been achieving, right? So there was some fear involved in that. So what I had to get to is the dust settled, I'm doing therapy, and over time I start to set healthy boundaries. I went back into my job, but I took pressure off. I tried to do the best I could and leave any of the results. Like, I gotta just get healthy. Like, my whole goal in 2017 was get healthy. And I think I had a fairly bad year that year, statistically, but overall, I got healthier as a human being, so there was a little bit of a cost to getting healthy as a human being, like, professionally. But then 18 was one of the best years of my career statistically, so it's like, but I also was playing the same way without the pressure. And so it's not that you can't perform without the fear and without all the that kind of stuff. It's the fact that you might need to take some time to do some emotional work some mental health work to get you to a place where you can say yes and no, set healthy boundaries, and get yourself back into a place where now you're performing at that high level, but you also know how to transition back into, some of the roles that have less pressure.
Yeah, and just the hard, or not even the hardening, like the growth aspect that takes place in your spirit during those hard times. It's like things get dark and it's hard, but like growth isn't linear. And I think when you realize that, you can find yourself, and as those, like, as like the training analogies, like as you find yourself in those moments that may feel dark or heavy, similar to what we talked about earlier about the courage to step into fear, you learn to kind of sink into those and say like, okay, there's a lesson to be learned here, because it's always, and it sounds cliche, but it's like, there is always growth that happens after that. It's like the Carl Jung quote of like, a tree's branches can't reach to heaven without its roots going to hell. Like, I truly believe that like the most wise, intelligent, grounded people I know are the ones that were willing to kind of go down in there and learn about themselves, or what you consider like the dark side of themselves, instead of always like pretending, similar to how the fear thing, oh, it's not there, that side of me isn't there. It's like, sit with it for a while, talk to somebody about it, become open, become vulnerable, because if you do that, you're integrating sides of yourself that you've ignored and neglected for a long time. And the more you do that, it expands your capacity out as a human, not only for your own growth, but to relate to other people. And that's like, hearing your story, it sounds like now that's your mission, is like, hey, I went through this myself and was able to pull some magic out of this. Like, let me share that now with others who may be going through a similar situation, because as I'm sure you found yourself, when you're in it, man, it is suffocating. And if you don't have the outlets to blow off some of that steam, as you said, with the suicidal ideation, you can end up in a spot where thinking that ending it is the best decision. And then as soon as you get on the outside of it, you're like, oh my gosh, like if I'd have just had outlets to blow off that steam, this would have never felt like a pressure bomb that was about to pop.
Yeah. Yeah. And you speak like you know what that feels like, right? And it's like when you're when you've never experienced it and you're dealing with somebody in your life that is dealing with that, you don't know what to do to help them. So let me give some people a helpful tip, okay? When someone that you're close to or you are going through this, one of the things they need desperately is they need healthy connection with human beings that will just sit with them in it and not try to fix them. They need people close to them to literally like just be there. Don't try to change it. Let them be sitting in that place and say everything that they need to say, and know that they're safe to say it, because there's a reason why we get bottled up like that, and why your brain thinks that the best option out of it is suicide, and it's not, but that's the only thing. When you're in that much emotional and intense internal pain, that's the only thing your brain can come up with. I'm telling you, the way out is not isolation at all. It's always through vulnerability, transparency, in a safe place. So if you're a person close to that person, you have to help create the safe space to where they feel like they can say things to you. Like if you're in an organization and someone says something like that to you, you have an obligation to go to a mental health professional if someone says something like that and say, hey, just so you know, I've got to tell a therapist that you said this to me. Right? Because it's the law that we have to like share it with somebody. We have to help get them help if they're saying something that might be, dangerous for themselves or for somebody else. But honestly, it's a very common experience. We need to recognize how common of an experience for human beings this is, so people don't feel like saying it is taboo. I dealt with it for a short period of time. I dealt with it, and it was scary. And I didn't know that there was safe places to talk about it, right? I didn't know that I was a normal human being for struggling with it. And, I think that's part of the stigma that we have to help erase, especially in high achievers, and say, hey, you can be struggling with this for very short, acute terms and jump right back into your performance and still perform at a high rate. It's how do we, it should just be an indication of where you're at. That's what we should look at it at. Just like if you make an error in the field, it's an indication. Maybe you need to do a little bit more work on your fielding pregame to prep. It should just be an indication of where we're at currently and what we might need. It's not a definition or an identity at all.
Well, and the irony is, and you never feel this in the moment, but as I mentioned before, the irony is that once you get through it, and of course it's always a work in progress, I think, it's like you realize then, oh my gosh, like what was so hard for, let's just give it that year period, is actually now been alchemized into a superpower where you learn through vulnerability and openness that like you had to use to get through that moment. Oh my gosh, I don't need to just shelve that. Like if I approach life with that, of course with healthy boundaries, it makes me so much more relatable and people feel comfortable sharing, to where you almost, it's near impossible to find yourself back in that place because you have so many healthy, deep connections with people that were formed because you did that digging on yourself and opened yourself up. Because what does the ego often wants to constrict and say, oh, I'm this and I'm that, and I stand like this and I act like this and I achieve like this. Well, when life smacks you in the face, you have to take a hard look at that. And that vulnerability then opens you up for connections that I actually think prevent you from ending up back there again.
100. I couldn't agree more. It creates an opportunity for connection.
Yep.
If you're open to it, if you're willing to it, and it is a superpower of leadership. Great leaders do it without realizing they're doing it. You know, they are connecting with human beings, their employees, the people, their clients, whoever. They're connecting on a very human level, and there's no hierarchy in that moment. It's literally just human to human connection causes people to want to follow you. So if you want to be a great leader, work on yourself, work on being more vulnerable and more human and transparent with your employees or your team or whatever it is, because that will only make your voice more powerful in their life.
100%.
I think it's the problem seems to be a bit more prevalent, particularly with men too, because for us, I think it's an ego thing, and you don't want to be vulnerable because you've been kind of trained that you got to be this tough guy. But I think from my optic, it has gotten better. I think way more people are talking about it right now than they were 10 years ago. And it's big in the military community too. Similar to what you said, Ben, is like, as soon as you kind of make it known that maybe you have a mental health issue, like it could be perceived as a kill shot for your career, because it's like, oh, that guy's broken and that guy, he's got major issues. So guys don't ever mention it and they internalize it. And that's why, the suicide rate from our community is so high, because it's, these guys that, it's supposed to be these macho dudes and they're fighting these demons, but they won't, talk about it. But I think it's gotten way better. And, I know in our community now, we check in with each other, right? Even if it's like a guy you haven't talked to in 5-6 years. Like I get texts all the time now. It's like, hey dude, just checking in on you, how things going. And it's, all's good. How are you doing? Hey, let's get a beer sometimes. Hope all's well. And that's just enough, man, to kind of pick you up. And like, it's not like I was in dire need of that, but I'm seeing that way more. And I know what those texts are about. I know that, that's a check-in of like, that's a mental health check-in. That's why I'm getting that text. And I do the same thing as well, because then I'm like, oh, this is actually really cool. I want to, think of all the guys I haven't talked to in 10 years and do the same thing. So hopefully just by us having conversations like this, and for people like you that are being vulnerable, I think that's awesome for you, that you're being kind of disclosing that story of kind of being on that mountaintop, but maybe void of some of the positive things that one might associate with being, the World Series MVP and all that. So I appreciate you kind of opening up to that, because I think there's a lot of people that would really resonate with that and realize they're not alone in that journey, and it will pass. And you gotta find the right people to align yourself with and feel that pain, and don't avoid it, and kind of that deliberate exposure. But then it will pass, and you'll come out a stronger person with a different perspective on it. And hopefully, if it rears its head another time in your life, you're more prepared to take it on because you've been through it once. Or if you have to be that person for that friend who's going through it, you've been in their shoes, you know exactly how you need to, help them out through that. So really appreciate it, man. You going through that. I know we wanted to be sensitive to your time, but for Champion Forward, my last question would be, how can people get more information on it? I kind of want to give you the floor I know we've been talking a lot about it, but plug it, and where can people support, website, all that good stuff. So people can get out there and support you guys.
The easiest way to get connected to Champion Forward is through the Instagram handle @Champion Forward. There's links to the website, or to the links of some of the events that we're doing this coming year. If people are interested in it. I am really proud of the team and the people that have been working on this, because they're really passionate about helping competitors, caretakers, and the coaches. And we're we're getting a lot of opportunities in various parts of the country. So we will be traveling. And if you're a coach or that has a team or an athletic director or even just a parent that feels like this is something that my kid needs or my team needs, please connect with us. We're fielding those kind of opportunities right now. And myself and my podcast host, because we have a podcast, Champion Forward. We are John Harrison's my podcast host. We're kind of moving around the country, doing various things in various places. So I'm excited to be able to meet more people this coming year. And we're actually doing an event coming up this week in my hometown of Franklin, Tennessee, which will be fun. But we do a lot of webinars too. So if we can't travel to you, we can also kind of get to your people that way and start to share some of the ways our methods and tips and techniques that kind of get people started in the right direction. Right. Because one of the things we talk about is we're not a mental health organization, but some of the things that we're going to help you with will benefit your mental health. And we want to help connect you. If you do need a practitioner, we are connected to some practitioners that we can funnel you to some people that we think do great work, in that particular space. But at the end of the day, we're all just trying to thrive in the midst of performance pressure, aren't we? It's like we all have jobs and roles and things that we're called to do on a daily basis that involve a level of pressure. And we want to be thriving in that and feel like this is what I want. And I know how to deal with it. Even when it gets high and a little bit hot sometimes, I know how to cool down, and I know how to handle not just myself and regulate myself, but also the people closest to me that I care about the most, right? Our teammates, our family members, and things like that. So I would love to, we're really excited about this coming year, 2024, being able to connect with a lot more people. We just launched in September, so we're still a baby organization, but we have some great things we're offering people. And thanks so much for letting me highlight it. And honestly, I love Born Primitive stuff. I mean, you guys know this. I told you this ahead of this is this is my Born Primitive hat. And I got this, what was it, 7 years ago or something, 8 years ago when I met you guys, and Trent introduced me to you guys, but still wear my Born Primitive. It's some of the best stuff I have. I always tell people, they're like, what is that? I'm like, yeah, it's the softest thing ever, right? It's Born Primitive. So
Ben,
it's awesome.
I have a funny little story before we sign off. So one of the games we went to, I think we were supposed to get on the field with you, but it was during the season where you took a little break. So I ended up meeting you afterwards, but we actually sat with your parents. It was Trent and myself, and I sat with your parents. Yep. And your dad gave me an offer that he would be the Born Primitive underwear model if we needed one. So
hey, hold him to it.
I know. So we might be calling him up if we need an underwear model in Illinois.
It sounds like Pastor Tom. I'm sure his church would. That's his sense of humor for you too. So.
Yeah, it was pretty fun. But yeah, I just wanted to say a big thanks for coming on. I jotted down a lot of notes from what you guys spoke of, and especially with a 1.5-year-old, I was a huge, competitive little kid, probably to a fault at times, played 3 sports, and my parents were very, not hard on me, but they pushed me to succeed. And even though I think it helped shape who I am today, it is a good reminder that, they're already, kids are already in their own head, especially if they're competitive and they're hard workers. And as a parent, if all you do is just sit there and criticize and push them to get better, you're just adding on to their problems. So, I only have a 1.5-year-old, but I know she's probably going to play mini sports, I hope. And it just gives me some good insight into how to parent her and how to coach her in those moments. So really appreciate your time. This is awesome.
Yeah.
Well, absolutely. I mean, God bless you and every other parent that's trying to figure it out, right?
Yeah. My goal right now. Go ahead.
I keep telling my 14-year-old, I'm like, you're the first 14-year-old I've ever had. So I don't know what I'm doing. I'm doing the best thing.
And that's why I think it's brilliant that you because when I first was researching the organization, I thought it was strictly the athletes, right? But you're talking about parents and coaches, because you guys know you get such a variance. You know, you'll get that one coach that if you lose, he chews you all out, and you know he's kicking stuff in the dugout. And then you get the coach that's kind of chill, and he's like, "Hey, you guys gave it your best shot. Like, let's come back tomorrow and try to get a W." And you're like, "Right on." Or you get the parent that's like, you know, it's like, "Dad, I don't need you to tell me on the drive home that I need to protect the outside corner." Like, I should have swung at that. I know, you know what I mean? But there's some parents that are super chill and like, "Hey, you'll get them next time, son." And so like, I you know, as you guys roll this out more, like again, for my own benefit, I'd love to, you know, kind of get the best practices, because I don't know what kind of dad I'll be yet. I got a 2.5-year-old and she's not in sports yet, but I definitely don't want to be that dad that's like, "All right, you gotta keep your weight back when they throw the hook." Well, I guess she's softball. She won't see a curveball. You know what I mean?
My favorite is throw strikes. It's like, hey, what do you think I'm trying to do? Do you think I'm trying to throw balls?
So the fact that you're hitting kind of the three major components of what kind of an athlete is exposed to, obviously their internal mental health, but then the coach and the parent, I think is such a brilliant thing. So kudos to you. And obviously if you need some new gear, hit us up. I think Mal and I can make that happen.
Hey, if you need custom gear,
yeah, there you go.
Trent's your guy.
Custom gear with champion forward on it.
That's right.
Now we're
100%.
talking. Oh my God. Wow.
We can get you mock-ups by tomorrow.
Awesome.
But
well,
Tony,
you guys are great. You're super kind, and yeah, I'm really impressed with where our conversation went. You guys obviously have done a lot of work yourselves, both mentally and internally and stuff. So I'm, you know, I'm just excited that we got to have this conversation. Appreciate it, guys.
absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you for your time, Ben.
And that memory of Game 7 is forever burned into my brain. So thank you for offering an infinite joy of that moment. I mean, I'll never forget it. I know Mal won't. Goosebumps moment. I had to hear it on an AM radio, which really kind of stinks, but in a way, because it's the home like commentator. Who would have that have been calling the game?
Pat.
Yeah, Pat.
Oh, Pat.
And
Pat Hughes.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it
Pat
was
Hughes.
Ron. He
No.
passed yet? I can't remember.
Coomer?
Santo.
No, he didn't get to witness the World Series, right?
No.
Oh,
he
that's right.
passed.
He had already passed, but
It was Coomer, probably Coomer.
that's right. But you know, obviously the home commentary is just so epic because they can get
Yeah.
emotional and
Oh,
get
yeah.
fired up. So in a way, you know, maybe the AM call was cool to hear it going down the third base line,
Yeah.
and you know, one run will score.
Probably
and,
way better than the on TV announcers. Sometimes they're a little biased.
Yeah, yeah.
The
So,
radio is definitely more exciting.
thank you for you know, sitting back on that cutter and taking it to third on two strikes. I am forever grateful for that, Ben.
Well, my pleasure.
And if you're ever in the area doing any of your seminars and you need a place to stay, Bear and I can definitely help you out.
Yep.
Awesome. Yeah, we need to plan something over there. We haven't gotten to your guys' state. You guys are in North Carolina, right?
Virginia
Virginia.
Beach. Yeah.
Oh, Virginia. Oh, okay. Sorry. Yeah, we need to get up there then.
Tons
We've not
of-
been there either.
Yeah, tons of travel leagues. And I mean, I'm sure that's everywhere, but there's tons of sports in this area. A lot of big
Oh, yeah,
players too came out of Virginia Beach.
Yeah. It's a hotbed.
Oh yeah, totally. Tons of major league players grew up there.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
I came up with BJ Upton was from the Virginia area over there. The Upton
Justin
brothers.
Verlander, the Upton
Verlander,
brothers.
yep.
There's a ton.
Oh,
My
dang.
brother-in-law
What's
actually.
David Wright? I think David Wright from the Mets was there
David
too.
Wright.
Damn.
My brother-in-law actually got drafted out of high school by the Cubs. He played up into AAA and then he got injured and ended up getting out of the league. But
Dang.
yeah.
What year was that he was there?
So he is like 3 or 4 years older than me. So he probably was graduating high school in 2002. So went to
Okay.
spring training.
So he was like early 2000s. He was
Yeah.
there
Mhm.
out of college or something.
Yeah, or he didn't go to college. He got drafted straight out of high school.
Oh, out of high school. That's
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very cool. Well, thanks a
Awesome.
lot.
Well, cool, Ben. Well, thank you so much, man. Don't be a stranger. If there's anything we can do to support what you're doing with your organization, please let us know. And thank you for a great conversation. And we'll catch you later.
All right. Sounds good. Thank you.
All right.
Ben.
Thanks,
See ya.
Ben.